And good morning, my beautiful America. Welcome back to the All American Book Club. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the month of July, and every month this year, we are celebrating America 250. So get your American flags out, get those apple pies out of the oven. Let's serve some fresh tea. And please help me welcome to the show for the very first time, Laura Frantz. She has written a beautiful book called The Belle of Chatham, and it is placed during the Revolutionary War. So, you guys, if you are not educated on George Washington, buckle up, because you're about to learn about George Washington in this beautiful book set in 1777. So, Laura, welcome to the show.
I'm so delighted to be here and celebrate our nation's amazing 250th with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So first, since you are new to this show, I would love to hear a little bit about your historical writings, your background, and also you are the mother of two United States National Guard soldiers. So I want to talk about that.
Oh, I'm always ready to cheer on my soldiers. I have our son, Paul, is currently deployed in Africa, in Kenya and Djibouti. And he's at the end of his deployment, so we are so excited to see him again. And then his wife, Anna Lee, my daughter-in-law, was in the Middle East for her deployment, and now she is along the Texas border. They're both officers in the National Guard, so we are very proud of them and pray daily for our soldiers and for their protection and wisdom and all else.
Oh, thank you so much for that. As I told you before, hey, this show all about God, country, and family. And, those who are in the DMV area where the show airs, it is the White House, Congress, active duty, veterans, and everything in between, our military families or military spouses. So you couldn't have picked a better show to be on. So
we're covering it coast to coast. You're in North Carolina, and I'm at the very edge of the ocean out here in the Pacific by Olympic National Park. So we coast to coast coverage there.
Amen, sister. We got it. So I would love to hear about The Belle of Chatham. I have started reading this book. I am captivated by it. I love it. And I want to encourage my listeners to go pick it up and, celebrating America 250. So let's talk about this.
Well, it was several years in the making. I'm old enough to have been little when we had our bicentennial back in 1776. And it's fun to see that come up on the web or have people talk about it, a very patriotic occasion. Well, fast forward quite a few years, and here we are celebrating our nation's 250th, which is even more of a milestone because Benjamin Franklin once said, you have a republic if you can keep it. Well, we have kept it now for this long, 250 years, and it is certainly something to celebrate. So several years ago, with our 2026 in mind, I thought I need to honor that occasion. Since I was little and marched in the bicentennial parade in full pioneer or 18th century costume, I need to honor this now that I'm an adult author by writing a book about our patriots and what it might have been like living in that time period. Of course, we don't really know. The historical record speaks pretty loudly about the American Revolution, but it was actually very complex. It affected everyone that lived, in England, in Europe, and also, our American colonies as they fought for their independence. So I tried to encapsulate all that, my love of the time period, my admiration, my desire to honor our heroes, our founding heroes, in 400 less pages of this novel. And I hope I did. I hope I can take the reader into a tiny, have them leap back and show them what it might have been like.
I've heard you do other interviews about this book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the research that you did on this, it sounds like it was difficult in this sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you share about that?
I can. I had heard that wartime novels were not popular, but then the abundance of World War II novels that's huge. They are popular, but they're just not many fictional stories set, around the American Revolution in comparison. So I thought, well, I'll just go out on a limb here and see if my publisher would be willing for me to do that. And of course they were. And so several years ago, I had been plotting this book or thinking about it and asking the Lord for direction. And then a couple of years before I actually started writing the Belle of Chatham, I had to start researching. It's extremely complex. The American Revolution has its own vocabulary.
Yeah.
It was fought in every state to my knowledge, or every colony to my knowledge. Then, we can talk about them as states, but it just complex on every level. I mean, there was, the family level at the very, the individual level, actually, when soldiers had to decide what side am I on. Many people weren't in one way or the other. They just wanted to live. It was a fight for survival, even to put food in your mouth back then, oftentimes. So they just wanted to do the best they could, and they weren't concerned with taking sides. A very small minority of people at first were patriots, actually. The majority were loyalists in our country, and that had to shift. And so I tried to capture that shift in 1777. In New Jersey, which is known as the crossroads of the American Revolution. A lot happened in Jersey. And so I hope I did Jerseyans, as they were called, and the war's history there credit, and a big huzzah to them for having that play out in their. It was a battleground state, literally.
It really is. It is. Yeah. My mother, as she will be listening to this or watching this, I'll say my mother is from Jersey.
Oh, perfect.
So, yeah. And then growing up in Jersey and Pennsylvania, I got the best of both worlds, but always grew up around the revolutionary history. And, from, crossing the Delaware and all of those just powerful times in that segment of a Revolutionary War. And then let me fast forward. All the years I worked in Washington, D.C., always was out in Mount Vernon, always wanting to study more of George Washington and just his life, his legacy, his faith, everything that he did just, to really become the first president of the United States. Tell me what it was like. I've heard other interviews of you talking about him. Tell me about that, what that was like for you.
Well, Washington was truly the man of the hour. Everything if you study his life from beginning to end, he had some tragedies and some huge hurdles to overcome. His father had died. His mother was a very strong-willed woman, Mary Ball Washington. He was unlucky in love, so to speak. I think the Lord was saving him for Martha, who was more than his equal. She was a warrior of a woman and a prayer warrior. She had a wonderful habit. I was just thinking of this the other day as I got up. She had a habit of being absolutely undisturbed for at least an hour every morning for her prayer and Bible reading. She was not to be disturbed. That was and she did that for many, many years. But Washington himself, he was not only handsome, he was also large and in charge. He was at least 6'2", possibly 6'3". They've done the measurements on his uniform. He was big. He was also an incredible horseman. I think it was Thomas Jefferson that said he was the most able horseman he'd ever seen. He was a warrior. He started out young. My tie to him personally begins with my Scottish ancestors, who were actually expelled from Scotland. I write about that in my novel, The Rose and the Thistle. My Humes rebelled against the king in the Jacobite Rebellion of 1715. And they ended up in Marshalsea prison, and then they were booted to the American colonies and landed in Virginia. And my George, as I call him, my George Hume, I'm a direct descendant, he actually taught George Washington surveying from 1748 to 1750. So they are intertwined that way. And then, people often forget George Washington began as a surveyor before he became a soldier, before he married Martha, and then he became the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, the American Army. So he and Daniel Boone, I like to say, are the only two historical heroes that I can never find any dirt on. They're absolutely clean. And of course, they weren't perfect. They had their flaws, and we could talk about Washington's temper, but he reined that in, and I think God restrained him. But he and Daniel Boone are just untouched to me as far as just historical heroes that really were worthy, that had men of integrity, and that there were no shadows or secrets with them.
Right.
So it was just kind of inspired me even more to write the Belle of Chatham.
So let's talk about the Belle of Chatham. You brought up something in a podcast I was listening just about the female characters in this book in this time period. And then I like how you also talk about Martha Washington's character. I mean, the absolute epitome of the Proverbs 31 woman right there. And
exactly.
And, talking about these female, very strong characters, sisters, who are complete opposites, and how it was to be a woman in this time in history, a very, strategic time in history, but also how difficult it was to be a woman in this time in history.
It was very difficult. It's hard for us to relate as modern 21st century women, because women back then had no rights. They couldn't, most of them couldn't own property. They, everything, if they did own something, it became their husband's when they married. So Martha, when she married George, she was, I believe, called the wealthiest widow in Virginia. And so she married George. All of her husband, a very good man, her first husband, died young. All of her property, and even down to the slaves she owned, that's another hot topic, sad topic, became George Washington's. So he became an extremely wealthy man. He was not gentry. He was self-taught. Yeah. He was not poor, but he was not in that upper echelon of the Virginia gentry. Right. And so just so interesting. So Martha had a very fine start that most colonial women did not. In the book, The Belle of Chatham, I try to introduce you to Lucy, who became one of my favorite characters. She was a camp follower, although they didn't at that time refer to them as camp followers, but she followed the army. Her husband was a drummer. And so you have Lucy, then you have Maebel Bohannon, the heroine, and her sister Coralie, who some might want to lock in the smokehouse after a while. But they're not gentry either, but their father they're pretty refined though. They don't have, they have a housekeeper in this little Jersey village, and they, don't have to grovel for everything they have. Their father was a pastor and a learned man. And so I try to, then I introduce you to Martha, who is very much gentry. She's mentioned in the novel. She doesn't, she actually says a few words in the novel in one scene, which is always filled with trepidation, because I never feel we can do credit to those characters. So I try to honor them, but, not make them the focus, lest I slight them, I guess, in some way.
Yes.
And, so anyway, you are introduced in this novel to every strata of society. Even my favorite little creature, Petey, is the dog in the novel, whom I've had readers say they absolutely love. So even dogs have a place in novels. Dogs were a big deal. They traveled with the army back then. Yes. So, we have to try to represent every inch of it that we can, I guess you'd say.
Well, so from the characters that you have written in this, who personally impacted you the most? Was it Maebel?
No, it was actually Reese. Reese was patterned, the character template for him was Daniel Morgan, who was one of America's top riflemen. He was a Virginian. He was a bit of a brawler early on, but he straightened out. So Daniel Morgan was Reese Harlow's template. And Reese, I felt for him because he was raised with a Quaker background. Quakers do not bear arms. They were pacifists or peacemakers. There's a lot to say, there's a lot to admire there, but at the same time, that doesn't win wars. That doesn't liberate people. So Reese's background, our hero, he's from a Quaker background. He would have been influenced by that. It took a lot of courage for him to stand up to his father and decide to become a patriot. I don't dwell on that a lot in the book, but I hope it's inferred. So his battle with his pacifist background and his patriot devotion, so to speak, is at war throughout the novel. And I think the ending surprised a lot of people. I won't spoil it, but it did happen. The ending as I wrote it, it's a sweet, satisfying ending, but I don't think anyone would expect it. But it reflects the challenges he faced as a soldier and as a husband. And he had to examine he had to examine himself throughout the novel and take a stand. And it was sometimes very painful. He had literally to decide at one point what meant most to him, winning the war or his wife. That plays out in the novel too.
That's interesting that you say that, because even if it's Revolutionary War or what's happening right now in the Middle East, you see a lot of our Marine soldiers, airmen, on the ground, and they really have to compartmentalize what's happening.
Yes.
They volunteered, they signed up. It's a selfless service, but the family also is doing a selfless service as well.
Yes. I've never experienced that till we did the send-off ceremonies for my son and my daughter-in-law. And I saw all the young children there whose fathers and mothers were being deployed. And I must mention, it grieves me to the heart that one of our recently fallen soldiers in this conflict in the Middle East was days away from ending her deployment, coming home. She has 2 children and a husband. And you just are gutted by that. That I think about that a lot. Most Americans don't have that front row seat to those happenings. They don't understand that when you go to these send-off ceremonies, as I call them, I don't think that's the right term, but you see these children whose fathers and mothers are going to be away from them a year, and they miss an entire 10 months to a year of everything, all the whatevers. I mean, that's an incalculable sacrifice that most people aren't willing to make.
Yes. And I think most people don't even realize that happens.
They don't.
And it's not of them not wanting to know, but it is if you are not around it, it's hard to understand unless you have become a part of it.
And you made such a good point. It's a family affair. It's not just sending one soldier off. It impacts everybody on every level.
Yes.
It's hard to even articulate that. And yes, all we can do is pray and support them as much as we can. Find ways to support them. Be there for somebody who is deployed and has left, their family, I don't want to say behind, but basically that is what happens. They've left them behind. They miss all kinds of things. The cost is incalculable. Then and now, especially in George Washington's army, which was started as a ragtag army until Baron von Steuben came into the picture, and he was very questionable himself, but he turned them around and made them somewhat of a fighting force. And there are lots of things that played into that, but it's amazing we're here. It's amazing that we're celebrating our 250th. It's a miracle, really.
Yes, absolutely. We are less than 30 seconds away from the end of this amazing episode celebrating 250 years of America. I am holding up the book one more time, The Belle of Chatham, Laura Frantz. Please go pick this up. But Laura, really quickly, where's the best place to hang out with you on social? Where can people just, tap on their computers or their phones and say, I want to talk to Laura today. What has she got going on?
Well, I would invite you to my site. It's a lovely site, laurafrantz.net. And you'll see that we're going the step forward. Halfway down the page, you can sign up for my newsletter. And I'm even doing a tour. I'd love to invite people on of our Patriot sites. We're going to Colonial Williamsburg. We're going to
Mm.
Mount Vernon in 2027 in the fall. So any of you who want to join me, if you're, a patriotic history lover, want to honor our founders, please join me on that tour, or at least join me on socials. You'll find all my social media icons at laurafrantz.net, and my newsletter goes out monthly, and I try to make it as delightful and kind of like a visit with you. So, I share other authors' books. I do, some things I think you will find compelling and interesting, or so I hope. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. So from coast to coast, yes. Wow, we have a lot to cover and a lot more to cover. So I hope you'll come back to the All-American Book Club. But Laura Frantz, you know what? I'm going to see you at Mount Vernon in 2027. We're just here. We're going to call it right here. I can't wait to meet you in person. So what a perfect place to meet.
We're delighted. You are the hostess with the mostest, as they say. Thank you.